I'm Stesha Brandon. I am the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. And as we begin tonight, I want to take a minute to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past, present, and future, and we thank them for their stewardship of the land. Welcome to tonight's book group collaboration with KUOW. Before we get started, I just have a couple announcements. We have assistive listening technology available on this table with the blue tablecloth. So if you find that you need a headset, you can just give me a wave and I can bring one to you, or if you know you need one now, you can do that. I also wanted to mention that you received a survey when you came in. We really appreciate it if you take a minute to fill that out at the close of the event. I read all of the surveys and it helps shape the programming here. So we appreciate you taking a little minute at the end of the night to do that. And I will also use this as an opportunity to invite us all to silence our cell phones. Because there we go. Okay, good. So we are here tonight because we are celebrating You Are Here, Poetry in the Natural World, edited by Ada Limon. And we are very lucky to have two contributors to the collection as part of the collection. And they're going to be talking with Katie Campbell from KUOW's Book Club. But for those of you that haven't participated in Seattle Reads programming so far this year, I just wanted to mention that we're really excited about this anthology. The poems are written by 50 different U.S. poets. The poems are accessible, and the collection encompasses themes of love, grief, environmental justice, and much more. And it builds on many of the themes that we discussed as part of Seattle Reads last year when we read Parable of the Sower together. And this year we are inviting readers to examine their own relationships to the natural world. And so tonight we're working with the wonderful folks at KUOW to host this program with Laura and Cedar, but we also have a ton of other programming throughout the next month or so through the end of May. The programming is divided into different branches: listen, learn, discover, and share. And I hope that you'll join us for a few more programs this spring. I am delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. We are lucky to be joined by Laura Day. Laura is a poet and teacher, a lifetime resident of the Pacific Northwest. Laura studied creative writing at the University of Washington and at the Institute of American Indian Arts. She is Eastern Shawnee, and her first book, Tributaries, was published by the University of Arizona Press and won a 2016 American Book Award. Day has held residencies at the Hugo House, Tin House, and Jack Straw, and her latest book, Instruments of the True Measure, was a winner of the Washington State Book Award in 2019, and Laura's poem Bad Wolf is included in You Are Here. Laura also has been involved in our guest curator program this spring because she was the poet planner for Poetry in Public. And so we will also be doing some Poetry in Public programming. Say that 10 times fast. We'll be doing that throughout the spring as well. And we also have a few Poetry in Public chapbooks to give away. If you feel inspired that you want to write your own poetry, we have some chapbooks on the table there. Laura will be joined by Cedar Saigo. Cedar was raised on the Suquamish Reservation in the Pacific Northwest. He studied at the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics at the Naropa Institute. Saigo is the author of All This Time, Royals, Language Arts, and Stranger in Town. Of his work, Ron Silliman writes, Cedar Saigo is a Frank O'Hara for the 21st century. Witty, erudite, serious, with a terrific ear and eye for the minutest details, at home in the world of the arts. In 2022, Saigo received a poetry grant from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. He has taught at St. Mary's College and Naropa University and lives in Lowfall, Washington. And they are going to be chatting with the wonderful Katie Campbell. Katie joined KUOW's online team as an editor and reporter in 2024 after serving 3 years as senior producer of the local Morning Edition program. She's covered a variety of local topics, including the Seattle City Council, elections, and breaking news. And in 2024, Katie created the KUOW Book Club, featuring stories and authors from the Pacific Northwest. Katie picks monthly titles and provides analysis along the way. And she ends each reading with an author interview, giving readers a look behind the scenes from some of the most talented writers in the region. So that's what we're doing here tonight. So please help me welcome Laura Day, Cedar Saigo, and Katie Campbell.
Thank you so much, Stesha. And thank you all for being here. This is very exciting for the KOW Book Club. It's kind of wild to think how far we've come already in just a year. And to be the Seattle Reads partner is a little bit of a dream come true, as is to be up here with these wonderful poets. So I'm very excited to get to talking with y'all. So we're going to jump in. And we're going to do it in two parts, I think. I want to give y'all time to honor and talk about your individual works that are in You Are Here, and then we'll get into the collection as this wonderful cohesive work. So Cedar, let's start with you. You're going to be in the hot seat for me.
Okay.
Let's have you start by just reading your poem that is in You Are Here, if you don't mind.
Okay. And I guess I should start by saying I don't write nature poetry. I never thought of myself as doing that often. Although, because I'm native, people look to me for answers about nature all the time, awkwardly enough. But this is called Close Knit Flower Sack. Seedless golden tears, ferns bound to flesh at off angles, busted out res towns, hemming us in with a cloak of mosses. The orchestration needs tufts of black shadow, incidental notes to weigh it down. The blanket depicts a field and loon. I said we once formed kingdoms at the foot of a vanishing stone. What was it I said that they said? Vividness is self-selecting, several points flowing together in stonework. I only use words like stones because we are far away. We corrupt a landscape through the planting of foreign flowers. Borders are often theorized as division, wending along with a spot of sunlight the bone frame was made for. No such shock knit within terror, yet the skeleton stood up to it. They are not artifacts, but fit to our hand, our daily voice, the short mouth line erased. The marsh revels in its glitter and occasional cranberry. The subject is left purposely unstable. We will not be robbed of continuum. The shells fly out from the dress on strings according to demands left in the music. Certain stories are told in full frog regalia. The music is allowed its wet set of wings and room to lie down. Words arranged for prayer are in fact geometric forms or portraits of poets themselves, uncovering the dictates of a graven line. Orlando, are we even allowing ourselves the present moment anymore? There are still two blankets that sit on either side. Reimagining can take place at the root of time. Out of all necessity, we convert the elements as a matter of course.
I think that deserves another round of applause. Yeah. Yeah. I especially love the line, we corrupt a landscape through the planting of foreign flowers. Like there's just something that it just grabs you, and the full frog regalia, just the choice of words. It's wonderful. Can you take us to where you were when you wrote that poem? What was around you?
I was house sitting in Queen Anne, and yeah, and
Lots of foreign flowers.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the thing about this book was that the turnover was really fast, and Ava knew that, and sort of was saying, "Well, you're welcome to be part of this, but the turnover is really quick." So a lot of times, I just started making any. I was kind of terrified at the prospect of writing something about nature because, as I said, that's a secondary mode for me. Or so anything I thought about the natural world, I just jotted it down in a panic for like a week and a half. And then I just looked back at those notes. And I think for me, oftentimes when I do that, the first round, it's very manic and I'm not sure what's there. I can barely read my bad cursive. But if I return to it, a lot of times, and I don't get super self-hating about it right away, then I can see there is something there and I can expand those notes. So it was a very ordinary experience, kind of like going fishing, but
Oh.
really needing something.
Sure.
Yeah.
You got to deliver day.
I was hungry. Yeah.
I want to ask about the structure too. For those of you who have the books with you or are able to look at it later, I believe it's on page 50.
Oh yeah, where is
I have it. Actually, no, it's not.
Oh.
We'll look at
Oh,
it
yeah.
for you.
It is
72. I was,
72.
only 20 off. It's the structure of it. Most of the poem at the top is, it's slid left, if you
Yeah.
will, and then it structures more to the right. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for those of us who don't write poetry for a career?
Yeah. For me, I feel like in poetry, too often the words feel like little soldiers corralled on the left-hand margin of the page and barely pulled out from the page. So I like it to look like a blueprint of an abandoned building. I mean, I like it to look fragmentary or something different. This one, it seemed like I was kind of utilizing like a column structure. And then I called the poem Close Knit Flower Sack. So it was kind of about, the poem was kind of about a weave, and it's kind of a collage. Not all the words are mine. So that close knit flower sack, the knit part sort of indicates the weave of the found and the lyrical and, of course, parts of my Suquamish history. So
I love that.
yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, my next planned question was, what does this poem say about you as more broadly as a poet? But I love what you said about being Indigenous, people look to you for things about nature. So I don't know that it says a lot about you as a poet, but can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that expectation and maybe how your work doesn't fit it?
Right. Well, the expectation, I think, is there, and it is valid in the sense that each tribe in this nation, they had to court the landscape around them and fashion a whole lifestyle out of it. Medicine, housing, songs, animal care, all of that. And each one of those environments from which these things were fashioned were different. So knowing that, just knowing that from being very young, that you already have this sense of primacy about nature and the possibilities of nature. But then also, we know what has taken place on this landscape, and we know the dark recesses of it. And then one can't help but think, does the bloodshed of the past, is that affecting what's happening now? So I think we have several windows into landscape. And so for the native, it's sort of a double consciousness almost. There's so many ways of looking at it, depending on how you wake up in the morning.
Right. That's so interesting to hear you talk about it that way, especially in the context of you having written this poem in Queen Anne, a
Right.
place that looked vastly different generations ago than it does today, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think the thing about me, the way that my work is different is I will write poems about Native history or contemporary Native life. But that's not all I do. And I don't mostly write poems about Native.
Sure.
They're a handful, but I found it was like a straitjacket, at least being a person of color, writer of color in this country, especially in the 90s. They expected everything to be beaded and feathered and blah, blah, blah. So I was never thought of as a stylist. I was always an experimental writer in terms of my approach, but people didn't know what to do with me. My own people, and also, the sort of academic poets in San Francisco where I was plying my trade. So, very much sort of an outsider feel.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to turn to Laura now as well. Can we have you read your poem, please?
Sure, thank you. All right, this poem is called Bad Wolf. I husk the houses from the land, each one as similar in size and shape as the battered crates behind the shipping store. The lake wasn't here with its jagged edges and dikes, puffing like keloid scars, so I drink it. I uninvite to receive more clearly
what the fringed prairie might have been, with its controlled burns and bone games and berries. In language class, I'm learning the story of the wolf who is perpetually punished for his bullyish pride, made to pursue a hornet nest and drown in his own reflection's snout, gleaming with the honey he was hoping to bite. I repeat the phrases and parse pauses from stresses. The markers I seek are nearly impossible to find. What is under this water and what was once water? Here where a trail once crossed, people gathered, then the hop farmers dug axe heads and projectile points, still bearing the scar from the plow. Within 5 miles, the battles of the first treaty wars are under the barns and soccer goals and signs allowing recreational drone flying. At the prairie, a solitary Douglas fir's high branches start well above my head, telling me it was once one of many. I must move the tendons of my chin and hold my tongue differently to string together the consonants in my language. To say wolf, I have to open my lips into pantomime of alarm.
Beautiful. Let's give that a round of applause. When we were here a month ago, opening up Seattle Reads, the line that had stuck with me was, to say wolf, I have to open my lips in a pantomime of alarm. When I revisited the poem in preparation for this evening, the lines that I turned to were, at the prairie, a solitary Douglas fir's high branches start well above my head, telling me it was once one of many. It was interesting to me how different parts of the poem spoke to me at different times. And I want to ask the same question I asked Cedar. Can you take us to where you were when you wrote this? What was going on around you? What was going through your mind?
Sure. So I was in Bonnie Lake, which is a rural community to the south of us. And I was trying to find certain markers. And particularly, I was hoping to find markers that indicated elements of the treaty wars. And I did find them. They were in little suburban kind of complexes tucked away. Some of them were on kind of obelisks that were impossible to read, and some of them were behind the target. So that's the actual kind of physical location of the poem itself. And as Cedar mentioned, the poem came fairly quickly. It was a rather rapid call. And I was at that time learning Shawnee kind of mythology in my language class. So I had that on my mind and the two concepts joined.
You've both mentioned that now, that this is kind of quick. Do you think Ada was getting at something with that? Was she trying to put you into this moment, or is that just kind of how the work works?
I couldn't really speculate, but for me, it was very effective. You know, it gave me a little bit of permission or
Yeah.
openness to more brevity
Sure.
than I usually approach poetry with. And sometimes I think that that's a really wonderful constraint.
Deadlines can be a blessing, even if they haunt us. And I want to ask the same question as you, or as of you as well. And what do you think this poem says about you more broadly as a poet, as a creative? Does it say anything about you more broadly? You're laughing.
Because I think every poem is kind of an artifact of a moment in time. So I think that it does indicate some of my great sort of poetic interests. One is kind of being on the land and kind of peeling through different layers of land. And the other, of course, is just language and how impossible it is, how as soon as you say something, it's gone. So I think it is a revealing poem in that regard. And I'm also kind of pleased to note that in the context of this whole anthology, it's deeply connected to the land it was written on. So you get this great scope of place within the anthology. So I think it also reveals place.
A lot of places too. There was a lot of different takes on the natural world. Everything from of course, climate change to a place shared between a couple as someone was dying. There was a lot of different ways that people connected. And one thing Sesha mentioned in both of your introductions, you both now talked about it. Laura, you're Eastern Shawnee, Sears, Suquamish, both lifelong residents of the Pacific Northwest, which is itself an especially incredible slice of natural world. And I wonder how your identities and life experiences as Native poets, but also as residents of this unique region, how did those things, those experiences influence your work, this work and your work more broadly? We can start with you, Cedar. Sorry.
It's okay. Um, uh, I mean, my father was a curator of the Suquamish Museum that came to be in the 1980s. He started it with an exhibit called The Eyes of Chief Seattle. So ceremonial objects and old Curtis photographs, Aishel Curtis and Edward Curtis, I was surrounded by archives when I was younger. So I, you would think that would grant permission, but it actually terrified me because my dad seemed to know all the data. And I felt like if I got something wrong, the poem was irrelevant or something. So that wasn't, how it should function, but that's just the way my brain seemed to suck it in. But then I was visiting out here and I was leading a workshop out in Columbia City. And I wrote the assignment for the class, the free write, the timed write was Things to Do poem. And I wrote a poem called Things to Do in Suquamish. And there's nothing to do there. So it was very easy and fun to write this list poem. And then after that, it seemed like I wrote that playful poem and then all the elements of the experience were available to me in a way. As long as I didn't ask too much too often.
How about you, Laura?
Yeah, this is a great question because I'm not entirely sure, but I do think so. I grew up in the Snoqualmie Valley, and I grew up halfway up Mount Si, if anybody has ever gone hiking there. So I do consider myself kind of a mountain poet, and the ranges of the Cascades, Appalachia, and the Ozarks tend to be kind of the core spaces of my writing interests. So I do think I grew up on a farm, and I think that it was a really suitable poetic education. And this land in particular, it's the level of saturation had such a deep impact on me. And I think in my writing, that's kind of one of my great stylistic reaches is for saturation. So this is a very saturated land.
I love that. I love how you say that. In running this book club and reading stories specifically out of the Pacific Northwest, I've kind of noticed a flavor that books and authors from here have. And part of it is that at some point, everybody seems to find time to mention the mountains, to mention the beautiful old growth forest, or just to simply describe, a beautiful evergreen tree. And there's something really unique in even if it's not part of the story, it's part of the story. Does that make sense? Do you feel that at all as creatives? Is it just in you at this point?
I think the eeriness of the Pacific Northwest is
Ooh.
in me, like a David Lynch version of the Pacific Northwest. It's not so much Basho's version or something, or Gary Snyder's version of the Pacific Northwest. It's much darker. And I think of I don't know, sometimes I just think of the Northwest as like a form of cinematography that I'm chasing, not so much a set of characters or, a prayer to nature or anything so contained. It's much more sinister. I mean, like Ted Bundy, the Green River Killer. I mean, well, let's not, they're part of nature. I mean, this whole thing. I mean, I just think those are the vibes out here. That to me, that's part of, and I love that nature poetry now. There's like queer nature anthologies. There's what do Black writers think about nature? How does slavery show up in the landscape? Let's get real about nature.
Well, even when you said Ted Bundy and the Green River Killer, they're certainly not the first, serial killers of a sort to ever touch on this land and leave scars on it.
So it's not as precious as sometimes nature can lead you to think it is as a subject.
It's dangerous. How about you, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I do think a lot about how, growing up in this space, I think it impacted my field of vision. The sounds probably impact the sound of my accent. And I do think that there's maybe an inherent capacity to notice layering in a landscape like this, to attune really physically to seasonality because it's unavoidable. And also it's a space where the landscape changes really radically within a space of a day's travel. So I think that has an incredible, to me, it's this incredible telescoping, like closeness and vastness that I think is connected in my mind to this region.
I love that. This is why you do words. Too, I wanted to have you both read your poems because I first listened to the audiobook version of this book, which I highly recommend to everyone. There is something to poetry, at least for me, where I prefer to consume it as like performance in a way. I love having someone speak it to me, especially the writers. And there was one poem in particular that it was written in both the native Hawaiian and in English that like really took my breath away. This is on page 36, and I'm going to do my best just to say the title. It's Aya I Hea Ka Wai O Lahaina No Ka Malu Ulu O Lele. And this is by Brandy Nalani McDougall, pardon me, Dana Naone Hall, and No'u Ravilla. And I don't know if y'all read this one, but it spoke to me in the way of poetry as performance. The audiobook reader read both beautifully, and it was really like incredible. I guess how is the spoken poetry different for you as writers of poetry? Do you think of that element of it when you're writing? It's kind of a big question.
I think of it a lot as an audience member and a reader because it does feel kind of like an alchemy when you go to a poetry reading. I know I've had experiences where maybe I was ambivalent about the poem on the page and then I've heard it read and it changes it. I haven't had the reverse happen, but so I think, it's hard to know, it's hard to be so kind of meta that you can think about what's happening in your kind of mind's ear as you're writing, but I'm sure that is a huge part of how we think. And possibly poetry kind of emphasizes or encourages even more of that. But I know, like, I always read a poem aloud through its sort of genesis, its revision, and you can't lie to yourself, or for me at least, I can't lie to myself quite as effectively if I'm reading aloud as I can when I'm reading just with my eyes. So yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting and critical process of poetry.
Can you say more about that briefly before I turn to Cedar? What do you mean by lie to yourself?
Well, I think that maybe this is something that's different from person to person, but I know if I read something aloud or even say it, I'm just more attuned to if it doesn't feel right, I can hear it in my own voice. But if I read it on the page, I often think that I've perhaps been educated to kind of give it some grace across the page or feel a hierarchy where I should trust the page more. So I think that it's a really powerful tool because for me, at least, you are your voice and you listen to it.
Again, I love how you put that because it makes me think of how we prioritize or value written tradition over oral tradition, for example, with storytelling. So that concept of prioritizing what ends up on the page versus how it sounds is fascinating. But Cedar, what does the spoken form of poetry mean to you differently? Do you think of it differently?
Well, I don't really think of it differently. One thing that I do, I use reading for editing. Like, I was really excited to read a piece last summer at the end of a reading, and I read it, and I've never read it again and never published it. I thought it was so great, and then I read it. It was like, oh, okay. It didn't sound right. It wasn't all that, So in that way, you are listening to yourself. You're kind of editing and realizing, wow, this is falling flat, or, and then, I mean, I treat readings almost ceremonially, like I just make sure I have my water, that I'm well rested, that I didn't, overextend myself before the reading. And then you can get to the point where the poems are reading themselves. I don't know if you've ever had that, but that's the best, and it's like singers, when they close their eyes, clearly they're going somewhere else. And you can do that when you're reading poetry, and it doesn't even have to be very performative per se. You have to have poetry voice to reach that point of intoxication.
Intoxication by words. Can you say more about what you mean when you say the poem's reading itself?
Yeah, well, when that happens to me, the way that I broke the poem, I spoke about blueprints earlier, and when that's happening for me, it feels like the blueprint is sort of crystallizing and lighting on the notes as I'm falling through the poem. But again, you can say all you want about it, but you're not going to quite duplicate what it's like to fall through the wind tunnel, But I think that like I was saying, I think the poems writing themselves is dependent on your preparation, not reading to the mirror. Don't use up that energy that you need for the reading. Don't get in a fight with your partner 20 minutes, because that's the energy you're going to need for the reading. So it's almost like an athletic performance, or it can be.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was like a poem in and of itself, that answer. Thank you for that. I wonder too, do y'all have like a person in mind when you sit down and put pen to paper? Like, is there somebody you are thinking of, and when you write, who you write for? Or you kind of looked in the direction maybe of your family? Did I see that correctly or no? Or they totally, you're like, I get them out of my mind.
I'm not going to put them on the spot at all, but I do. Yeah, I think that, I think about everybody I love a little bit when I write, and I think about myself. Sometimes I think the great thing about poetry is to me, at least, it's an incredibly disciplined, analytical art and craft. But there's a space in there where you kind of allow yourself to enter. It's like falling in love. You get to be kind of a little bit less in charge. And so in a way, that's you're writing to yourself, or you're writing to maybe your future. You're writing to an intention of how you want to express yourself. But yeah, I do I do acknowledge my family, my friends. It is a collective that allows and inspires any kind of art, I believe. And so yeah, I'll be interested in thinking about poems and wondering, like, who do I write to in this particular poem?
Well, hopefully I don't ruin it for you. And also thank you for handing me my headline. Poetry is like falling in love. Goodness.
Maybe.
Falling out of it sometimes. Cedar, how about you? Do you think of anyone?
I think of like 50 people, 50 poets that have like made their own books and given them to me, or some of my students, or I don't always just think of my contemporaries like Laura. I think sometimes of retired people that have never had books out, but they're obsessed, and now finally they've retired, so they get to write during the day. I mean, I'm also not on Instagram and stuff, so I don't want to know how other people think of poetry. You know what I mean? I like they're
terrifying.
So I don't want to think of everyone. I want a selected audience. Like people say, a chosen family. Mine's a chosen audience in my mind.
I always worry about asking creatives and writers, especially, about their influences and their inspirations, because it can feel like a very like highfalutin question, and there's like this pressure to be reading fancy people. And shameless plug, we have a new podcast at KOW called Meet Me Here, in which I'm going to be interviewing authors, and that's one of the questions we've been talking about is, we have to ask the authors who inspires them. And I'm like, I don't know that I need to know that. I don't need to know what, again, like higher thinker you think the audience wants to hear you inspired by. I want to know what really inspires you. And I felt like I felt a little energy there behind your answer, Cedar. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about just what keeps you creatively going.
A lot of people that are my contemporaries, and they're artists, but they're not necessarily poets. They're painters, and they're send me paintings, and Or I just did a reading at City Lights in San Francisco, and my friend Amy Rathbone, she gave me a painting, a small painting after the reading. And say the question one more time.
What kind of keeps you going as a creative? What inspires you? It sounds like these paintings.
Oh
help.
yeah, I mean, just people. I think what inspires me, like in what
Creatively, what
Uh-huh.
what?
Oh yeah, people. You were saying.
Yeah,
you
so
didn't wanna
sorry.
ask about people. Right, right, right. Well, I think yeah, other practices, people that take their practice as seriously as I do poetry. I
Mhm.
mean, I'll deal with poets, but I feel like I almost have a quota on the number of poets.
Sure.
So, or people in bands. Or I love to go to an art show. I love to look at paintings I can't afford,
Ooh, yeah.
and try to get my artist friends to make a copy for me. Things like that. I mean, I just like to have fun, and it seems like I really like to have. I don't mean for it to be like this, but I feel like I'm only maybe friends with artists, almost not like in a snobbish way, but as a form of protection.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
The reason some people are in academia, I have artist friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
And apologies for the long wind up. I'm working on that too. So that's good notes for me. Like a picture, I'm like winding in there. How about you, Laura, though? What inspires you?
Yeah, I think that I really enjoy like places and being in a place, particularly like for me, one that is maybe slightly adjacent to my personal history, not a place I know per se. And people really mystify me, artists, poets, carpenters, everybody. Um, so I do think that when I think of like what causes me inspiration or what sort of opens a particular gate for creativity, it's usually a place. And then I think that I'm very inspired by my students. So that's maybe not necessarily by like what they write, but just by kind of the spirit and energy of learning or of like not learning. So I was really lucky, I think, to come from a teaching background because it created a beautiful kind of well of inspiration for me. And I'm always especially interested in, I think of people in the same way, people who I have some adjacency to, maybe not best friends and maybe not colleagues, maybe not fellow artists, but I just find kind of slight contact with people really fascinating. So that's a source of inspiration.
Yeah, mystifying. People are mystifying. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. I wonder too, to talk more about the collection, was there a poem that just kind of made you go, wow, like they really understood the assignment, but maybe differently than I did? Is there one that stuck with you? I can give you all a chance to look too if you'd like. Cedar, you can borrow my copy if you want. And while we look, we will be taking questions here shortly. So if you have questions, please share. If you've written a poem of your own too, and feel brave enough to share, I would really love to hear some of y'all's thoughts and what you've come up with. Don't make me have to share my own. How about that? If you share yours, you don't have to hear mine. We had some lovely book club readers write in with their own poems, and I was really kind of stunned by what people came up with. It was amazing. So be thinking about what poem you might want to share.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite in here was Joy Harjo's, who's a friend of both of ours, and yeah,
Do you want to read it?
yeah, sure, I'll read it.
Please.
Yeah, it's called Eat, and Joy Harjo was the 23rd Poet Laureate of the United States and is a member of the Muskogee Nation. Grasshoppers devoured the sunflowers, petal by petal, to raggedy yellow flags. Squash blossoms of small suns, blessed by dewdrops, flared beauty in the morning, until an army of squash bugs landed and ate, then dragged their bellies from the carnage. Field mice chewed their way into the house. They eat anything sweet and leave their pebbled shit in staggered lines to the closet door. Hungry tree frogs clung to the screen, their curled tongues catch anything, with wings driven to the light. We found a snake hidden on the porch. There were rumors in the yard of fat mice frolicking here. The night is swallowing daylight. We sit down to eat.
I do love that one. It's very, it's visceral, it's hungry.
Yeah, it's like a little diorama.
Yeah.
I love well-lighted poetry. Yeah.
It's the circle of life in words. Less animation, less Disney.
And it's brief too.
Yeah. Which one did you pick, Laura?
Sure. I mean, I really love the way this anthology came together, but I particularly enjoy Jose Olivares' You Must Be Present, which is on page 28. Um, I love the kind of collaborative poem that you mentioned. I really like Jericho Brown's Aerial View, which is on page 60. At one point, I went through and photocopied.
Yes. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, no worries. But I think that if I were to kind of read through this tonight, I'd probably find 2 or 3 different ones.
Sure.
But those were some of my favorites upon,
Yeah.
upon reading.
Yeah, there's something about what strikes you in the moment, right?
Mhm.
Like I even mentioned, there was a line that stood out to me in your poem in one reading, and then there was another that really stuck out to me leading up to this evening. I guess I wonder, what do you hope lingers with our attendees and our readers from the collection, but also particularly from your own poems? What do you want people to take away from this? I know it's a cliche question, but I'm always curious what people think.
I want people to come away with the fact that that poetry is like a ceremonial object. It's like an assemblage, a sculpture made out of like trash. It has more presence than just words on the page. It's a construct, something that actually, is heavy to the hand. I mean, I have a very I allow language to have presence, and to enter the room and to be in the room. And I think that has to do with listening to other people's language and letting it fill the room before you attempt that with your own stuff, and really enjoying and certain ways of courting the poem, paying attention to your habits. What time do you like to write? What books do you want to steal from, and take half of a line to start and then erase that line once the poem is, quote, yours? So I have this secret sort of artillery of how to get things going.
Secret
Yeah.
artillery.
Like, yeah, also just to, just to pay attention to what you want. When you want to write, you may have to work forever and never write at 2 p.m., but then maybe finally 10 years later, you're finally able to write at that time. And then what happens? What happens when you date a poem versus when you don't date it at the end? What happens when you write for 5 days and you make yourself write for at least 3 lines for 5 days, and then at the end you're only allowed to erase 2? Just make up make up your own forms.
How about you, Laura? Because I'll have a follow-up question to that, but I want to let you go first.
Okay. I think, when I think of writing poetry, I like that it might encourage maybe people to think in a more kind of like associative or dreamy way. I always feel like that's kind of a lost art, to allow for kind of a space of confusion. I think it's really wonderful to work really hard at something that doesn't seem obvious, something that kind of defies logic, that has its own clear interior logic, I think is just kind of a wonderful human habit. And then when I think more specifically about like this collection and poems that are grounded in place, I think it's really healthy, especially here, like on the North American landmass, to look at your places with more gravitas, a little more both kind of horror and honor and love. And I think a poem can really kind of create a little bit of a lens to that examination. A poem can make you think about your hometown in a different new way. So I love that in particular about these poems.
I'm glad you mentioned the confusion before we got started. We were backstage and talking about, sometimes people can feel a little intimidated by poetry. It can feel hard to write, and it can feel hard to just read. Again, there can be this expectation of you have to read the right poets. And we were talking a little bit about how maybe bewilderment sometimes is the point, and to accept that can be really hard. But Cedar, I want to go back to you mentioned like writing 3 lines a day. How do you both sit down to write a full poem? Because I think, and this is a question for those who don't do it every single day, as I assume many of us don't. How do you do that? Is it a weeks long work to write one thing?
I think it preys on the mind in different ways. Like if, which is happening to me a lot of the older poets, they're like 80 years old, the older poets that befriended me when I was like 30, and they're dying right now. So one day it'll be, an elegy to this poet that nobody knew about that just died. And so that's on the dash in a way, and that's to be taken care of. But you kind of have to wait till the death has happened. Is that going to appear as poetic material, poetic matter? Also, you have deadlines. You have this thing, and you're supposed to write a nature poem, and that it's kind of this multicultural nature anthology. So you have that, on the dash. Plus, you're preparing for your classes, and poetry, writing your own poems eventually it feels like a recess compared to the other literary chores, which can be fun and stuff. But so the poetry, you're dying for a little free time once you become, quote, established. So I never understood writer's block, but
You can't afford writer's
Right.
block. How about you, Laura? How do you approach that? Is it recess?
I mean, it kind of is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's light work. It's not going to like hurt your body necessarily. No, I think that it can change over time. That's been my experience. That some kind of the arc or process of revision, which I think is really really delightful. It's really cognitively satisfying to work really hard on a small piece of writing. But I've found that arc, it's maybe a little speedier for me now than it was 10 years ago. But at the same time, I think that what I love about kind of the ease or the recess of poetry is there is a lot of executive functioning in contemporary society, and it's so boring. It's so dull. It's so awful. And poetry can kind of scoot around that. So when that happens, I feel like it's a like added delight to the art.
When I tried to write my own poem, because I gave myself a little deadline, I was like, I'm assigning this to all of the readers, so I have to do it too. It was so nerve-wracking because I'm like, I want 2,000 words to tell a story on a good day, and I've got like, let's see, 16 lines. Are you kidding me? It was difficult. That said, do we have questions from the audience? Do we have the capability for questions from we do? Okay, beautiful. Or do we have poems that y'all want to share? Could be your own, or maybe there's a poem from the book that you'd like to highlight. I know there's something out there. Oh, did I see one? Or no, maybe not. It might have been your watch flashing. So sorry. Oh, let's go. Let's give him the mic. There we go.
Samsia will bring you a mic.
There you go. Sorry, you can go ahead. I'll repeat your question. Just to repeat that for our online audience and for everybody, the question is basically, are you living in the shadow of the past and in what's possible in the future? And I think also within that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just like, how do you stay present to write this kind of poetry? I love that. It's okay. Take a moment. Be thinking of your questions while they do. I'll start calling on people. I will.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I think a lot of kind of my poetry, it probably does come from early childhood. And I did grow up in the Cascades. I don't think I had a concept of nature. It was completely accessible to me. So I had no margin that I left, nor did I have any natural fear. And so I think that in some way writing poetry, it's like trying to get back to that space. Um, it also makes me think about in many, like in my indigenous language, there's certainly no word for nature. There's no concept for nature because there's no binary. There's the othering that occurs. I was talking to my language kind of mentor, and he said the closest thing we have is really like the verb for to portage, to have to go through underbrush is. And so I do think that this idea of kind of even the worldview of nature it is fixed to particular social constructs. And so in a way, so is kind of past, present, and future. But I do think a lot about past and the morphing that will occur on land, and that we are natural as well, regardless of what we do. We are natural. So yeah, I don't know. That'll be really interesting to see how that impacts literature and how we kind of story make as time goes on.
I would say just that I think of, certainly when I think of my personal Native history, I think of us as translators of nature, as I said earlier. So we're translating all of these elements into ways of living. And so translation, that always feels a little after the fact. So maybe you're right. Maybe I'm living in the past there. But living in the past is almost, it's like almost like a child's imagination of what it was like back then. I know you and I, we do zone out on that. And again, maybe from a tribal point of view, so what we're imagining is completely different and completely respective of our individual tribes. So there's just so much within this translation of nature that each of our tribes did. There's so much to find there, and to think of it through the lens of translation, I think is helpful.
Yeah. It's funny to think about the future, right? Because I think in like a very white Western sci-fi view, we kind of like, we see these dystopian, very mechanized, very metal kind of future visions, and they're all really dark and kind of sad. And it's like, why isn't there like a vision of old growth forests returning kind of stuff? And I don't know. There's something in that question that I would love to ponder. I like that. Anybody else? Anyone inspired? Oh, we got one up there.
Oh, Samsia will bring you the mic. Okay, we'll call you next. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're good.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Cedar. Your words spoke to me. They sang for me. They danced for me. I'm inspired. But my question is more to Cedar's, a phrase from Cedar's poem, Black Shadow. Am I right? And Black Shadow?
Yeah, Black Shadow, was that in there? Probably. Oh, wait.
Right?
Oh, tufts of black shadow.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
Let's see, the orchestration needs tufts of black shadow,
Right.
incidental notes to weigh it down.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to diverge slightly and go into the Star Wars canon. Are you familiar with Blue Shadow?
Who?
Blue Shadow? No, probably not.
No.
It is something recreated by a mad scientist called Nuvo Vendy. And it's 100% lethal. Its mortality rate is 100%. It was very dangerous. Now, do you think from our perspective, we've become like a virus for nature?
Yeah. I was thinking when you said, I mean, we live in a dystopian novel. I mean, we're still working our way out. I don't understand why people are being like, oh my God, the world's falling apart. Our world fell apart 100 years ago. And, we were just thinking about our families, we could locate it like that. Yes, I do think that. And I think that's true individually. And yeah, yeah, I mean, it's catastrophic. I mean, for our people, and it's so yeah, it's not something that can be shared here. For me, anyway.
Do you have thoughts about that, Laura?
I'm not sure. I do think that, yes, certainly we are. And more perhaps pertinently, our capacity for extraction is a pretty horrifying virus. But, you know, viruses are also, it's all inherent in a way to the human function. You know, terrible things happen to us. We do terrible things to one another. Um, it's hard to make too much logic out of it, in my estimation.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think we're heading upstairs.
So first, I want to say this is our first time at this library, and to come on a night full of poetry, I love that. Um, we can't wait to come again. So if you can kind of hear my twang, because it's not going nowhere, not yet at least. We're originally from Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. We say that in like one word,
Welcome.
you know.
Oh, yeah.
And every day, this is the first time that I've ever been able to see a sunset, ever. And I would like to know, how do you feel when the sun sets?
That's a beautiful question. Yeah.
My friend Chris, he told me one time that when the sun is going down, it's called the offing. Like, you know, and I always loved that, like the offing. My favorite place to watch the sun sink is Nia Bay, which is the most northwest point of Washington. Yeah, how do I feel? I just feel like I want to drop into the ocean myself.
Yeah, thank you and welcome. I was just maybe near that region of the world. I was near Athens, Ohio, and the Hockin Hills, and just a beautiful, beautiful area. But a thing I just love about the sun setting is you always have to take a minute and realize it's just the earth spinning. But I do think to me, it always brings a kind of particular sense of perhaps gratitude. You know, you've made a day. You'll be able to rest and wake to a new one. There's something, a beautiful human pattern about it. Yeah.
Hold on to that twang, by the way. I'm from Florida and it's left me unless I get a little comfortable, a little bit of bourbon. Welcome. That is really exciting that you're here. And hopefully it inspires a little bit of poetry, even in your heart. Anybody else? I think we probably got time. Perfect.
Question right here.
Actually, I have one to read.
Yes.
If that's
Wonderful.
all right. So I have to stand up for this.
Let's give him some courage. Give him some. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And this is because my wife, who passed away a year and a half ago, was a somewhat distant friend of Vi Hilbert, who was one of the conservators of the Lushootseed language. So I got interested in the names of things. Now I have to apologize. My Lushootseed pronunciation is terrible. But how lonely is a mountain with one name? From the north, Toko'oma, breast of earth, giver of water. From the west, Dewak, who wipes the sky clean. From the south, Njakwiklu, the fountain of rivers. Now, on the many tongues which cannot form its names, merely Rainier. McKinley was once known only by the people to the north, Denali, the High One, and by the people to the south, Dikili Ka'a, the Great Mountain, Tava Ka'avi, Sun Mountain, He Otoyo, Long Mountain, Tus Pe, Heavens Touch Earth, Pikes Peak. The same mountain, revered by different hearts in different tongues, is not the same mountain. and yet it is one mountain. Once each raised strong echoes in as many tongues as the people's calling to it. If these echoes die away, what is left? In the poverty of one tongue, the mountain will remain, reduced in straitened circumstance, down to its last name.
My goodness. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do you, yeah, I have questions. What do you all think of that? Does that inspire any? Yeah.
Well, I knew Vi, so yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, she was my buddy.
Oh, you're okay.
And yeah, thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good. Never mind. We got more questions. All right. No, let's do
One
it.
more question? Thank you. Dream anthologies or poetry collections, what are collections on themes you haven't yet been able to be in conversation with other poets on in a collection? Or who are some other poets that you would want to be in collection with?
Well, an anthology that I'm in that's coming out this next year, that is kind of something different is like I think it's like described as like a two-spirit native anthology. So it's like trans and queer native poets. So that's coming to pass, and I always wanted that, and now finally that seems to be possible. But I was just thinking of this. I mean, I've made all kinds of strange anthologies over the years, and I just make my own. If I don't see the book exist, I make a chapbook version of it. Once I made an anthology of like 25 different contemporary poets doing translating the same poem by Mallarmé called Sea Breeze, because I did this anthology because somebody claimed it was impossible to translate it into English. So I was like, oh, really? Well, let's test that theory, you know? And and I've also done a lot of like fanzines for writers that I think are like forgotten, and so I just take action sometimes and make it myself. But you have ones?
I'm just thinking about it right now. I think it'd be really cool to have a anthology that's maybe curated by musicians. So an anthology that has kind of the spirit of the way that a band or an orchestra functions together, I think would be really interesting. Of course, I think multilingual anthologies are fantastic. Anthologies that center translation are really interesting. But yeah, I'd love to see like a sort of musically guided anthology. It'd be really interesting.
Also, like artist writings. I love the writings of visual artists, and I think that could be I would love to edit that or something like that.
What you said, Laura, made me think of Bushwick Book Club's current banned book series. They're doing music inspired by banned books. It's been fantastic. And I think that's progressing through the summer. I don't know why, Stasha, you're my authority on all these things, but yes. So I think it's going through the summer. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, it's a cool kind of look at what Laura was saying. And also, I want that Two-Spirit anthology for next year's book club. Anybody else?
We have books for sale. I
Oh,
have
that's
new
a
one.
good, yes.
Yeah, I'll sign it.
Yes, we have both the You Are Here and we have collections from both of our wonderful poets. And we have the KUOW table. I would be remiss if I didn't shamelessly plug that a little bit. We are your public radio station. If there's no other questions, I'll just say thank you so much to you both for giving us a peek behind the poetic curtain. And thank you to you all, whether you're brand newcomers or you've been here a million times. Thanks for taking the time to talk some poetry this evening.